The screams of an innocent child echo through the cold stone corridors of the royal palace, eyes filled with fear, hearts torn apart by the unrelenting claws of fate. In the shadows, the whispers of a tragic story have been buried for centuries, hidden from the world as history turned its gaze away. For over 200 years, the final moments of Marie Antoinette's children were concealed from the public eye. What happened in those last hours of their lives? What were the true costs of royalty, power, and the blood-soaked history of France? In this video, we uncover the shocking, heartbreaking tale of the royal children who were born into grandeur, only to meet their end in unimaginable sorrow. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on this tragic and mysterious journey through the royal family's darkest secrets. In this video, we explore the harrowing fall of Marie Antoinette and her family, from their lavish lifestyle at the Palace of Versailles to their eventual imprisonment. With vivid imagery and gripping details, we witness how the monarchy's walls began to crumble, bringing death and suffering to the children who had been born into privilege. As the revolution's flames spread, the royal children were forced to face a cruel and unforgiving reality. In the shadow of the guillotine, the lives of the royal children took a dark turn. Captive in the temple, the little ones, torn from their mother's arms, were thrust into a nightmarish world of isolation, hunger, and fear. This segment uncovers the tragic last moments before their brutal separation from the world as they knew it, and the cruel fate that awaited them. We will examine their tragic stories, filled with unanswered questions and an aura of foreboding. The Palace of Versailles, once the beating heart of French royalty, now stood as a hollow monument to a time of glory long past. The gilded walls, the endless halls of opulence, and the vibrant gardens where Marie Antoinette had once promenaded in grandeur were now tainted with an undercurrent of fear. The whispers of revolution, a murmur at first, had risen into a deafening roar. The queen and her children, once the embodiment of the divine right to rule, were swiftly becoming prisoners of a nation they could no longer control. Marie Antoinette, the extravagant queen who had once danced in diamonds and silks, was now a symbol of excess, a lightning rod for a fury that had been simmering for years. She was the last queen of a dynasty that had ruled France for centuries, yet in the eyes of the people, she was more than just a monarch. She was the very embodiment of the monarchy's sins, the lavishness of Versailles, the endless hunger of the people, and the cruel disconnection between rulers and the ruled. Her popularity had plummeted, and her fate was sealed long before she would face the cold steel of the guillotine. But it wasn't just Marie Antoinette who would bear the brunt of this revolution. Her children, born into unimaginable privilege, would feel its bite more deeply than anyone. The young Dauphin, Louis Charles, and his sisters, Marie-Thérèse and Sophie, had been born in the heart of this royal world, a world of luxury, of power, and of myth. They were meant to be the future of the Bourbon dynasty, the heirs to the throne. Their lives were meant to unfold in the palatial corridors of Versailles, their destinies written in royal blood. But now, with the revolution tearing apart their world, they were no longer princes and princesses, they were captives. It was 1792 when the royal family's downfall became a certainty. In the dead of night, the French revolutionaries had stormed the Tuileries Palace, dragging Louis XVI from his throne and tearing apart the royal family. Marie Antoinette, clutching her children, watched as the world she knew was torn asunder. They were imprisoned in the Temple, a cold, isolated fortress in the heart of Paris. No longer monarchs, no longer symbols of power, they were mere prisoners, stripped of their titles and their dignity. The children, once heirs to a kingdom, were now pawns in a larger, bloodier game of revolution. The atmosphere in their new prison was stifling. The air was thick with the scent of decay, of damp stone, of despair. The walls seemed to close in on them, offering little comfort or safety. Marie Antoinette, ever the mother, tried desperately to shield her children from the horrors unfolding outside the prison walls. But the revolution was inescapable. It was there, in every whispered rumor, in every creak of the temple's old doors. The world that had once admired them was now determined to see them fall. For Louis Carl, the young Dauphin, the world had already become a place of cruelty. At just 8 years old, he was subjected to the harshest of conditions. His former life, filled with tutors, luxuries, and palace servants, was replaced with cold stone walls, oppressive guards, and the deafening silence of the revolutionary's rage. The child who had once played in the lush gardens of Versailles now spent his days in a dark, suffocating room. His only companions, the echoes of a France that had turned its back on his family. The weight of his lineage, of his destiny as the future king of France, was a burden he could never escape. Marie-Thérèse, the eldest of the royal children, fared no better. At just 12 years old, she was not shielded from the realities of captivity. With her mother's attempts to protect them growing weaker by the day, Marie-Thérèse was forced to watch as her world crumbled around her. The once proud royal blood that coursed through her veins now felt like a curse. Her siblings, Louise Charlotte and Sophie, looked to her for strength. But what strength could a young girl like Marie-Thérèse offer in such an oppressive, hopeless world? Sophie, the youngest, had not even reached the age of 2 before her world fell apart. The child whose laughter had once filled the halls of Versailles was now lost to the relentless tides of history. Her death would remain a tragic footnote, but for her parents and siblings, her passing represented the loss of innocence, of a future that could never be. Sophie's tiny body, frail and sickly, would succumb to the harsh conditions of captivity, an echo of the cruelty that ran through the veins of a revolution that spared no one, not even the innocent. But the suffering of the royal children did not end with Sophie's death. As the months dragged on, their fate became clearer. With each passing day, the specter of execution loomed larger over the royal family. And while their parents' fates were sealed in the eyes of the revolutionaries, it was the fate of the children, those innocent pawns in a game of political upheaval, that would become the true tragedy of this story. The temperature inside the temple was always colder than it seemed outside. It clung to the walls, creeping into the bones of those who were trapped within. For Marie Antoinette and her children, it was not just the freezing air that threatened to suffocate them, it was the suffocating weight of hopelessness that grew heavier each day. The days, then the weeks, blurred into an endless parade of anxiety and dread. For Marie Antoinette, the sounds of the revolution, the distant cries of angry crowds, the pounding of fists on barricades, reminded her constantly of the nightmare she and her family had become. Yet, in the shadow of her own imprisonment, she never stopped being a mother. Every day, she clung fiercely to her children. She watched over them with an intensity that bordered on desperation. She could not protect them from the filth of their surroundings, nor could she shield them from the whispers of death that crept closer every day. But Marie Antoinette, in her final act as queen, refused to abandon her maternal instincts. Even as the monarchy crumbled, she was determined to protect her children from the worst of it. For Louise Charlotte, this meant a long battle of physical and emotional suffering. The young boy, who once was bright-eyed and full of curiosity, had become a shadow of himself. His former tutors and caretakers, those who had been there to teach him about art, literature, and statecraft, were now gone. What remained was a grim reality. Days filled with hunger, isolation, and unbearable fear. The boy who had been heir to the throne was now a mere prisoner of the revolution, caught in a cold, unforgiving world. Marie-Thérèse, still the eldest, tried her best to stay strong, to offer what little comfort she could to her mother and younger siblings. But as the days turned into months, her strength faltered. She saw the toll captivity had taken on her family, the weight of their grief and isolation bearing down on them all. She had once been a symbol of royal grace and composure, but in the dim, claustrophobic space of the temple, her royal composure began to crack. The youngest child, Sophie, died in the prison, a tragic casualty of the harsh conditions. She had been so small, so fragile. In those final days of her life, there was no comfort, no relief. Sophie's death,
a quiet and heartbreaking one, was a stark reminder of the relentless cruelty of their imprisonment. There was no ceremony, no time for mourning. She was buried in an unmarked grave, lost to history. To this day, her exact resting place remains unknown, a ghostly symbol of the royal family's suffering. As if the death of Sophie had not been enough, it became apparent that Louise Charlotte was too falling ill. The boy who had once been surrounded by tutors and servants now faced illness and deprivation in the harsh, unfeeling cold of his cell. His health declined rapidly. He was left to suffer in silence, his cries ignored by the guards who saw him not as a child, but as the embodiment of everything they despised. Marie Antoinette, watching her son withering away before her eyes, must have felt the weight of an unbearable guilt. She had failed him, failed to protect him from the horrific forces that had destroyed their world. The rumors that circled her, rumors of her cruelty, of her lavishness, of her detachment, seemed to fade into irrelevance in those final hours. Here, in the silence of the temple, she was simply a mother, helpless in the face of her child's suffering. Her dignity, her royal title, had lost their meaning. She was only a mother desperately fighting to hold on to the last remnants of love for her children.
As Louis Charles's condition worsened, Marie Antoinette was faced with the cruelest of realities. Her son was dying, but there was nothing she could do to stop it. No royal physician, no luxurious remedies, only the cold, uncaring hands of fate. The whispers of the revolution outside the prison walls grew louder, and the clock ticked towards the inevitable. Marie Antoinette's final hours as queen were drawing near, but it was her role as a mother that consumed her every thought. Her children, whom she had once dreamed of seeing rise to their thrones, were now mere shadows of the children they had once been. And so the hours ticked by, each one colder than the last. The royal family, once resplendent in its wealth and power, had become nothing more than a tragic relic of a bygone era. Louis Charles, his body growing weaker, clung to his mother as best as he could. His small fingers, pale and trembling, reached out for her, a gesture that seemed to say all that words could not. In those final moments, he was still her son, a frightened child, asking for love, asking for comfort in a world that had forgotten the meaning of both. Marie-Thérèse, seeing her brother deteriorating, had to reconcile with the cruel truth that there was nothing she could do to save him. The princess, once proud and full of life, had witnessed the collapse of her family. She stood as a silent witness to the suffering of her family, the weight of the revolution pressing down on her. In a cruel twist of fate, she was left to face the fall of her family alone. Her once innocent childhood had been robbed of her. It was gone, replaced by the bitter realities of captivity, death, and the stark realization that there was no escape. As the cold winds of revolution swept through France, it was not only the monarchy that fell, it was the very innocence of a family. The final hours of Marie Antoinette's children remain a heart-wrenching chapter in history, one where power, cruelty, and the brutal winds of fate collided with the innocence of youth. The royal family, once the embodiment of grandeur and privilege, was reduced to mere shadows in the eyes of a nation determined to tear down all that had come before. Louis Charles, the boy who could have been king, died not in the splendor of a palace, but in the dark, suffocating silence of a prison. Sophie, the youngest, was taken before she ever had a chance to truly live. And Marie-Thérèse, who survived the horrors of captivity, would carry the weight of that tragedy for the rest of her life. The royal family, torn apart by the very forces they once embodied, left behind a legacy of suffering, loss, and unanswered questions. These children, born into a life of unimaginable wealth and power, became victims of the revolution's fury, their fate sealed not by their own actions but by the tragic wave of history that washed over them. They were more than just figures in a history book. They were real children with hopes, fears, and dreams that were stolen from them. Their story serves as a reminder of the cruelty of revolution, the brutality of power, and the ultimate fragility of human life. And yet, in the shadows of their tragic end, there is a glimmer of humanity that should never be forgotten. The love between mother and child, the resilience of a family in the face of unimaginable suffering, and the desperate attempts to protect one another from a world that had grown cold. All of these elements make this story a powerful, heart-wrenching reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit endures. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on the deeper consequences of power and history, please like, subscribe, and share this video. History may have buried the truth for centuries, but stories like this deserve to be remembered. Until next time, let's continue to unearth the forgotten tales that shape the world we live in.